Hey, good afternoon. We're at the top of the hour, so welcome everyone. We have a great webinar for you today and a great group to help present that. Just a few housekeeping notes before we start off with. We're recording today's webinar. Did I mention we're recording today's webinar? We'll be sending a follow-up email to all of you with a link to the recording and the slides. So usually the first question we get is, will the deck be made available? And the answer is yes. If there is time, we will have a question and answer period at the end of the webinar. Please use the Q&A function located in your toolbar. So please feel free to type in your questions at any time and we'll get to them at the end. If for any reason we don't have enough time to do it live, we'll get back to you individually. So I'd like to start the webinar today. My name is Rick Stein. I'm with FMI. I'm the head of their fresh foods. And with me today will be Jonna and Kelly from Circana. And we would like to kick off 2025 with our top trends in fresh. Before we do that, I did want to give kind of a shameless plug to our Fresh Forward event that FMI hosts in August. This is an intimate event. Only about 125 folks come to it. But what makes it so special is we get the leaders of fresh from different retailers and wholesalers and bring them together with the leaders of fresh suppliers to really tackle some of the industry issues. And you can look at the issues we'll be talking about this year. And I think they resonate with everyone. The labor challenges, how we're going to play to health and well-being in fresh, and how are we going to win the meal occasion. So I hope all of you show some interest and click on the links to Fresh Forward. And we hope to see you there in August. Okay, guess what? It's been 10 years. Jonna and I were talking about it. It was 10 years ago that we started the top trends in fresh, and it's still going strong. What's interesting is some of those trends that we uncovered back in 2016 are still viable today, and they're still going strong. I want to think of today's discussion. I thought about it, and I was telling Jonna, I think I would think about today as more, what are the dynamics that are currently impacting fresh? And then as we move through our future webinars, because we'll have 3 more this year, we'll get more into the trends. So we'll start today's discussion of where does fresh stand? And then in the second part, we're really going to talk about some dynamics that are at play here that you all need to be aware of in order to be successful this year as we continue to get the momentum continuing with fresh. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Jonna, and Jonna will take you through the first section, and I hope to come back shortly and maybe add some comments. Jonna, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Rick. And I don't know if anyone caught it. I was actually in one of those pictures at Fresh Forward last year. It's become one of my favorite industry conferences because we have real brainstorms on the types of things we're talking about here today. So first off, we're going to bookend the first part of this conversation. By the way, there will be additional slides in the download pack after you get that email with the recording. So if anybody's here to get some deep numbers and data, it's going to be in the download. But one of the biggest things that we noticed as we began this year for fresh foods is we know that there's some strong strength. This was an incredible industry in 2024, and there are many tailwinds propelling us in fresh farther and faster than we've ever seen success. However, of course, there's also growing headwinds, particularly major headlines and complexities that are really shaping how the consumer considers fresh foods. So consider this the one slide summary. We also have a more detailed summary at the end. What Kelly and I will do next is set the landscape for you on these types of dynamics and why they matter for fresh. First off, I mentioned this when we last met, and I want to say it yet again. Fresh foods is outpacing the growth of almost every other consumer good. In fact, the joke we made internally is, other than pet care, nothing is growing as fast as fresh foods. So this is from our complete store data. At Circana, we now track so much more than the CPG industry or the fresh industry. We track every consumer good category that is available at retail. So we look at the 12 months ending November. Fresh food ranked 4th in total dollar sales growth at 4.9% for dollar in revenue generated at all of retail year over year. Units, though, were another incredibly strong growth rate. In fact, fresh foods, which is our 5 fresh departments we talk about here in Top Trends in Fresh, produce, meat, deli, bakery, seafood, and no floral, all of those departments are what's included in fresh food. Ultimately, we had 3% unit growth in those combined departments last year. Whereas, as we've probably already drawn your eye, if we benchmark that to non-fresh food and beverage, so in the food and beverage line right next to that fresh food box, what you have there are grocery, frozen, and dairy. And actually, the total of food and beverage at retail had a great year. Total food and beverage and total retail grew about 3%. Center store food and beverage was about 4% and 2% in units. Fresh topped it and those rates. But now compare especially our unit growth in fresh to several other industries that consumers spend their hard-earned money on. We are outpacing. It leads to a tremendous tailwind, but also a lot of pressure, especially from our retail partners, that fresh deliver the foot traffic and the interest. And that's really what's facing us this year. So now, taking a world outside of retail and instead talking about national food and beverage. Here, of course, I'm going to bring back up total retail. So the combination of food and beverage center store as well as food and beverage fresh in total at retail was $1 trillion business in 2024. Now, that represents about 61% of all dollars spent on food and beverage are just in retail. 86% of all meal occasions, whether they be special, everyday, snack, or dinner, 86% of the times that people eat food in America are sourced from retail. In fact, that is 3 percentage points more and holding since pre-pandemic. Now, we also talk a lot about food service. And one quick mention, David Portalatin and I will be covering the blurred lines between retail and food service at our Circana Growth Summit. But the ultimate reality of the retail concentration is then we're seeing less and relatively flat occasions and share in the food service spectrum. But what I'll tell you is food service, just like retail, is a really large group of types of channels. And from a fresh foods perspective, I think wherever the food service establishments can solve needs, we are seeing evidence that in those situations where they're more relevant to consumers, food service is stealing a little bit of our lunch and breakfast and snack. So let's turn this dime one more time. Let's talk about how we eat. Because ultimately sales, whether it's in food service or retail, whether it's fresh or center, is driven from eating occasions. So when we take a look at meal occasions, one of the hypotheses that's come up a lot in my work is, are people eating differently than they did before? And from our Circana National Eating Trends panels, we know that there's been some disruption, right, in 23 versus 24, particularly a bit of an erosion, but I say a bit, in the between meals and slightly less main meals. For the purpose of this graphic, a main meal would be breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Between meals would be any time you snack where it's not a full meal. We let the consumers define what they mean by this, by the way. But if you're doing the math throughout today's conversation on the opportunity in the dollars and volume that is potential, multiply that the average American human, because this is per capita, has 1,834 meal occasions per person per year. If you can get one of your fresh foods or maybe your store to create one more incremental occasion, think about the math on that. We shop differently today than we have before. In fact, when I'm asked at a top line level what's so different, people expect me to talk about meal occasions being different, and they definitely are much more important. But people are shopping the way they're eating, not the way they shopped decades ago. So this is a theme we're going to talk about a lot today and throughout the year. While we are getting fresh foods to sell more than ever, we have to recognize that the American shopper is shopping differently. Furthermore, what you see on the left is that quick trips now make up 56% of all retail occasions for food and beverage. Quick trips is defined by less than 8 items, typically only going to 1 or maybe 2 departments. 56% of the time that people are going to retail, they're just buying a few things. Now, dollars obviously favor the more pantry stocking trips. But take a look at the graph on the right when we look over time at how trips have changed. There are more trips than ever, but not necessarily bigger trips. And also, if someone is doing a very conscious, intentional long trip with lots more items in it, i.e. a pantry trip, that is increasingly going to the only club or mass super. If I'm thinking stock up, I'm going to go where I know they have everything and it's cheap. We'll go in a minute to talk about how this more frequent trips plays out to different departments, but more trips doesn't mean a lot more items, doesn't mean a lot more dollars. And as I'll show in a second, it also doesn't mean that every fresh food is faring the same. So what is driving quick and more frequent trips? Overarchingly, we are seeing in 2024 that 219 trips were made for food and beverage to any retail outlet last year. And what's really driving that 19 more trips versus 2021 is a little thing called inflation. When you think and you know that the price of goods are so much more than some other time you had previously, one way you can control that spending is by making more frequent trips for just what you need, what's relevant, what's cheapest when you need it. Overarchingly, inflation and the combat of buying just what you need is what's driving the more frequent and quicker trips. Why would you waste things you might want to buy? Why not just buy in the moment at the store that's most relevant to you? Now, fresh foods has honestly earned more than our fair share of this more frequent shopping trip. Ultimately, we're making 5 more trips in 24 than we made in 23 for the fresh foods departments. And specifically, this just-in-time shopping behavior has driven growth in certain categories. So for example, in 24, the fresh meat industry and the department overall had more trips. But those trips were disproportionately much more frequent, specifically in beef, chicken, and dinner sausage. What's in common in those department or those categories is the fact that you've got versatile, quick cuts that make sense. When you buy ground beef or chicken breasts, most consumers know exactly what they're doing with it. They're using it that night and they're not going to waste it. There are tons of other categories in fresh meat, but when you just know what you need for dinner tonight, those are faring. By the way, deli prep, which is immediately eating, like in deli prep chicken or party trays, also seeing frequency growth there. And we continue to see frequency growth in specialty cheese. So overarchingly, produce is the powerhouse when it comes to foot traffic, and it's not any different in this new environment. But bakery and seafood are not seeing trip growth. Furthermore, the total department of meat, when we exclude beef, chicken, and dinner sausage, is down in trips. Meat was something people used to stock up a lot on in these pantry stocking trips, maybe freeze it or maybe try to take advantage of a bigger sale. That's not how we shop today. And so while beef and chicken and those quick versatile cuts are winning this just in time, it's not helping the total department. So where does fresh rank versus center store and Bev Al in the retail food and beverage spectrum? This is one of those data charts that, yes, we will be recording this, and yes, you will be downloading a link to the presentation and an email following today. We're getting those questions in the chat. Ultimately, when it comes to food and beverage, fresh is a powerhouse. Now, the ratio in share in dollars eroded a bit since 2019 for total perishables. Again, as we've talked about in prior top trends in fresh, the rates of inflation and the ability to drive and do a different product price mix is more in CPG. Fresh, we're still kind of selling what we grow. But from a unit sales perspective, because of the growth of things like produce frequency, deli prepared meats frequency, deli prepared overall frequency, we are actually making up more units in the smaller baskets in fresh. So I always say what fresh really drives for a retail perspective in food and beverage is frequency and foot traffic. So what about categories? And this one made Rick's head hurt. So we're gonna skip the version, and not just Rick. Many of us looked at this eye chart and we're like, whoa, that's a lot. But let me focus just on the fresh here for a second. In our corporate thought leadership, we ranked the category level of food and beverage. The color codes, when you see the full version, the prior page, will be relevant to what departments they come from, or I should say what spaces they come from. But ultimately, what we wanted to point out here is when you look across the bottom, that is a compound annual growth rate. So things more to the right, like deli prepared meals, which are things like sushi and chicken parmesan or tamales sold out of a deli department, already ready to heat or eat. Deli prepared meals and fresh had both an extremely strong compound annual growth rate since 2019, but the height of an item here also points out just their one time year over year growth rate. So things in the top right in the strategic quadrant are things that are seeing long term growth as well as short term immediate growth. So they're both weathering the the pandemic and post pandemic storm in 2024. They're also experiencing short term growth, even in an inflationary environment. Deli prepared meats, deli entertaining, deli cheese, all things I've talked a ton about because delis have reinvented themselves as solution centers. Furthermore, fresh food fruit had a phenomenal 2024. We'll talk more about that when we talk about berries later, but produce pretty much still grows things and sells it. And if it's a great crop season, they give a good price point. It's a little more complex than that with today's consumers. That's part of why vegetables, which we'll talk about in a minute, actually are growing, but still have opportunity. But before I turn it over to Kelly to cover those dynamics that are shaping consumer choice today, we do have a hill to climb in fresh, despite all these tailwinds. Deli meat, many reasons that if you join some of our calls, you know more about than even us. Deli meat had a disruption last year. And frankly, consumers haven't returned to the cases or even the products that are previously packaged. We also see that bakery desserts and sweet snacks are struggling. Fresh bakery, which has so many relevant solutions, is struggling to grow more than 1%. And ultimately, the seafood department remains challenged. So we'll give you some strategies on that in just a bit. But before we do, since this is top trends, or we call it top dynamics in fresh, we got many questions about what consumers are thinking about today. So I'll turn it over to Kelly Krumholtz, one of our amazing fresh foods industry analysts, to talk about some of those mega dynamics that are shaping some of these trends.
Thanks so much, Jonna. So consumers are spending a lot of time thinking about food. And I'm not just talking about what they're going to have for their next meal. They are really thinking about truly what is in their food. What are the ingredients? What are the additives? Is it ultra processed? Where is it from? These are all key considerations that are rising to the top that are in benefit of fresh as it stands. Consumers are really starting to think about restricting additives and dyes, particularly think about red dye number 3 that has been in the news in the last 4 weeks. And what we're really beginning to see here is that people are thinking about food as it connects to their health. So they want to make sure, how am I addressing the added sugars? Am I aware of potential allergens? They want that transparency, and that is truly what the fresh departments are able to offer these consumers. Alongside that, consumers are continuing to prioritize their health and wellness. And every year, we ask consumers about their resolutions, and physical health and diet goals consistently rise to the top. People want to do better. They express this intent consistently. As well as when we think about health and well-being, we're not just talking about physical health, that is one aspect to it, but there's also a mental component to it as well. And food and beverage plays a huge role in how people feel about themselves and life. Food and beverage can really help people to lose weight, eat healthier. It can also help them to cook at home more. And the cook at home aspect is another way to help manage stress. And when we think about these better food choices, there is a large contingent of consumers out there who are part of this healthy mindset, and they want to make these better choices here on the left-hand side. And they are truly a powerhouse in buying power, accounting for over a third of total food and beverage spend. That includes both retail and food service. That's out there. So large opportunities on the horizon. And we have all of these great intents being expressed. People want to make better choices. They want to have those clean labels. They want their transparency. Yet, what we're seeing is interesting as we look at fruit and vegetable consumption, because these are natural winners, right? Fresh is offering all these great benefits. Vegetables are great for you. Fruit is great for you. And as we look at this chart here, what we see is that fruit has done a great job of holding its own in terms of eatings per capita. 180 of these eating occasions in 2021, and that has been fairly consistent through the years. And in 2024, there was a slight increase. But in comparison and contrast, we look at vegetables. We started 156 eatings in 2021, and we're down to 129 in 2024. Why is that? They're both good for you. We have all these great intents, but where's the impact at the end of the day? And it comes down to relevancy. And the fact is that fruit has done a really great job of tapping these relevant and immediate occasions, really leaning into the snacking and ingredient aspects to drive this additional consumption. So how do we do that with vegetables? I think we have to consider how these fit in line with consumers' lives today and how they are eating and how they're preparing their meals. So we love this chart. We love the dinner continuum. It has come up. It is a fan favorite because it does a really great job illustrating all the opportunities that are potentially out there. So if we look to the left-hand side of this chart, well over half of our dinner occasions are really focused on being fast meal fixes and simple everyday meals and things that have no prep. We're looking at things that are 15 minutes or less, simple dishes with few ingredients. That is the bulk of our time being spent. But where do vegetables sit within all of this? You'll be really surprised. It's here on the far right-hand side, where 39% of vegetable eatings associated with dinner are within invested meal and time-intensive meals. That's only 16% of dinner occasions. Now, we're not going to say nobody makes these meals. They do. And we actually are seeing trends that are out there indicating that younger generations like millennials really are leaning into making more involved meals when they have the time. But just think about how many occasions are left to tap that could really help to boost overall vegetable consumption if we were to really tap more into the fast meal fixes, the simple everyday meals. We need that relevancy. We need to be part of the meal experience in order to deliver that growth. And that comes from understanding how people make their meals and what's important to them and their needs. As well, another key trend that you have probably heard about more and more over the last year and a half is the impact of GLP-1s. There have been gross concerns around how is this going to change how people eat? How does it change how they shop? What do they buy? What are they not buying today? And there was a fantastic webinar in January that really dug deep into this. And what made that webinar impactful was it doesn't just look to say, are you on GLP-1s? Are you off GLP-1s? It dives into how their habits change over the course of their first year, those initial months to year one and afterwards. So one thing we wanted to call out, if you don't have time to listen to it all, is there's a great chart here that looks and understands how behavior has shifted in those initial months to the later parts of being a GLP-1 user. Now, certainly there are departments that we would expect to see some downshift from. Frozen, refrigerated beverages, things that might be a little more processed, a little closer to more empty calories, or higher in fats, things that don't work as well if you are a GLP-1 user looking to lose weight and to manage your health. What departments do especially well are deli and produce. These are all green across the board, whether you're in your initial months of using a GLP-1 or you've been on it for over a year. So there are certainly opportunities here for fresh that are definitely worth tapping into, especially because the GLP-1 user, again, mirroring their initial desire for cleaner products, better, healthier products with more vitamins and minerals. Fresh is the department to do that with. And I'm going to pass it back to Jana to take us deeper into some generational looks.
Thanks. I'm so glad we covered the health and wellness points, and especially about the role of GLP-1s. It is an important question, and I love it because, as Kelly just showed in our broader study, which is across all industries, by the way, because there's even implications for wearable technology and how we package food. But I think the key message is understanding more detailed consumer bases is what's going to really help us in the future. Another lens to go deeper than just trying to sell everybody everything all the time remains generations. Now, last fall, we did a deep dive on the role of generations in fresh. But the reason generations, especially younger consumers, are important to consider in fresh foods and recognize they're a different audience is because the buying power is shifting. So this is just a one chart stat to remind you that the growth in the future will continue to come from these younger generations. Now, as we shared last year, one of the things we really wanted to understand about the younger generations are how they shop for fresh relative to other foods. So this is an update from a graphic that we did late last fall, and it shared some good news and continues to be some concerning news. When we break down each of the 5 generations in the food retail buying populace today, from boomers all the way to Gen Zs. By the way, Gen Zs in all of our work are people who were born in 1997 or later. And yes, while it also includes my high school children, right now, a lot of those folks are in their late 20s and have already started establishing their households. Young millennials versus older millennials is another important break we like to distinguish. Millennials this year are in their 40s, some of them, right? Young millennials are still folks who are 35 this year or younger. So we are always talking about people who came of age during post 9/11 realities and have always known Walmart as a grocery store and the ability to order anything on a smartphone or a tablet. When we look at young millennials and Gen Zs, what we continue to see is important is that their share of total food and beverage spend is less in fresh than, let's say, boomers. And I keep benchmarking to boomers because so much of how we market and think about fresh foods today is still anchored in the concepts that we built in the 80s and 90s. So when we consider that young millennials and Gen Z are spending less of their total dollar on food and beverage, but then we look at the fact that these young millennials are not necessarily growing their spend in fresh either, it's really alarming. Now, it's exciting that Gen Zs increased their fresh food spending by about 0.7 of a point last year. But I do know also they equally increase the rate of their spend in other departments, particularly center store. And as I said in our last generation piece, I still feel that we're being a bit outmarketed when it comes to fresh versus center. Now, one other lens to consider of a headwind facing fresh is the reality about price perception. As of January, our most recent survey we just did a few weeks ago, 84% of consumers continue to feel, across, by the way, demographics and generations and income levels, that food pricing is still too high, and they're expecting it to continue to be higher. Now, my colleague, Chris Dubois, shared recently a really important economic stat. Most people and price changes take about 3 years to work through the consumer's mindset. So if you got used to the price of something, let's say $5 cinnamon rolls a few years ago, or maybe 39-cent bananas a few years ago, it takes at least 3 years to work through those life cycles. But pricing in fresh and obviously all of consumer goods have gone up and down a lot in the last few years. Every time there's that kind of disruption, like we're seeing with eggs right now, it's going to take another 3 years to reset what the average price is. One of the other points to connect to generations, 49% of consumers in Gen Z and overall are extremely concerned about food cost, even higher rates in that younger group. Now let's talk about tariffs. Here in Circana, we like to understand the consumer lens on everything. And so I do want to make a point here. We do have up on our website and available to our clients a deep dive looking at a recent survey we did around tariffs. Ultimately, we have to remember in fresh that a lot of our foods and inputs to make those foods in fresh do come from not within America, Mexico specifically, as well as a lot of grains and seeds and livestock from Canada. But the point we want to share with you today is among all consumers, tariffs are expected in their perception to impact price. So when we look at all respondents, regardless of how they feel about tariffs, 57% believe that tariffs being imposed by the US will increase the prices they pay on food and beverage and just things overall. Now, what's really interesting to me is among the populace who previously said that they support America having tariffs, 55% of those people still believe it will cost an increase in price. But of the folks who oppose tariffs, which by the way, in the full study, you'll see is the majority of Americans do oppose tariffs, those folks are almost unanimous in believing it will impact the price they pay at the store. We also know there's been a lot of food recalls, which not unique to fresh, have disproportionately hit our departments. 75% of consumers in January said they were aware of food recalls, and 2 in 5 of those respondents have directly changed their buying behavior because of it. And believe me, I've done a lot of research and actually wrote a whole blog about what disruptions like recalls do to the consumer mindset. But one of the most interesting things is when we broke down those 2 in 5 consumers who have changed behavior, all of these rates here on the left are additive. So 28% of people said no matter what food was recalled, I'm staying away from it, even after it's been safe. Specifically, we had an option for people to choose which they're buying less of or more of because of recalls. 11%, in addition to the 28%, said it's the deli counter they're staying away from. And if you've seen our deli meat updates, you know how this has affected that industry. I also thought it was interesting, the yin and yang of organic produce. 9% say they don't want to buy as much produce, very, very small. We're talking about 9% to 75%. 5% say organic makes them feel better. The big thing here is recalls have shorter long-term disruptions in the consumer mindset, and how that changes is usually directly relevant to how ubiquitous and exchangeable that food is. Now, one thing to keep in mind, a lot of products that had recalls, regional, smaller recalls in produce last year, actually only saw a momentary blip in their volume. Whereas when we look at the deli service case, that has had a long-term negative trend. One last point, because it's vitally important. How do we get out of these tailwinds in fresh? Well, historically, we did retail price promotion. We put more trade, especially into the supermarket, high-low grocery channel. But here's the reality of what just throwing trade promotions do in this new complex environment. So I'm happy to report that after some dips, other than in Q3 of last year, in total fresh foods, excluding dairy, Q4 saw a bit of an increase in the percent of promotional investment. And we make that based on the portion of our point of sale dollars that are promoted, because we know those are investments when you discount. From a frequency and depth standpoint, in Q4, again, we saw about a 94 index overall to frequency. We had more frequent promotions. We also saw a depth of discount exceed at several points in 2024 what it had been previously. But here's the kicker. You would expect with more investment, more frequency, and deeper discounts that we would see more volume lift when on promotion. The reality is that Q4 in fresh foods delivered an under-indexed lift in volume when we price promoted in the grocery channel. So our biggest lever that we've had to pull as an industry for 100 years, let's discount it and it'll drive foot traffic, right, is not delivering the volume lift. We have to be smarter about the promotions that we do, and we have to get back to connecting with consumers and what they really want to drive dollars back to the grocery channel. And Rick, I know that's a point you're very passionate about. We've had lots of great conversations about these headwinds and tailwinds. So would you mind sharing with the group a little bit of your thoughts of what Kelly and I just went through?
Yeah, I would tell you, we could spend 3 hours just talking about the dynamics of what you talked about. And I could go deep into each of it, but we don't have enough time to do that. There's a couple things I would say overall. Yeah, fresh is having good momentum. It's not having great momentum. And within that momentum, there are some winners and losers. You know, we're just showing you the averages. And what I'm seeing more and more is we have, and often as FMI, I'm trying to speak to the retailers and wholesalers. And I think, Jonna, you do a great job communicating to the suppliers and more upstream. But for the retailers out there, what I would ask you to think about is we have the things that are working in our favor is people are eating more at home. But I think what we have to start moving away from is selling items and prices into solving for the consumer. And we really need to think that's what they're looking for, is a solution. And sometimes we're good at it and sometimes we're not. And there's a lot of things we have to consider when we do that. We have to, and you know, Jonna and Kelly took you through it. We got to think about the generations. We got to think rural versus urban. We got to think about fill-in shopping versus the pantry shop. And we got to think about how health and well-being plays into it. And the fact that, you know, consumers are now on different types of, you know, GLP-1s and things of that. We also have to think about how food recalls are playing into that. At the end of the day, though, that consumer is looking for a solution, and how do we play into that? And then that last stat that you gave on how promotional effectiveness, that really worries me, because quite often that's the lever retailers pull to grab market share back. So that means we have to ask ourselves, are we providing value and are we standing for something? Because what we see is the winners have some kind of reputation, whether that reputation is service, value, price, it could be a bunch of different things. But whatever that reputation is, seems to be retaining their loyalty. And that's what I think we have to solve for. So those are, you know, I threw out a lot there, but those are my quick reactions to some of the dynamics that you and Kelly covered.
Rick, and it's perfect setup because now what we like to do in our little bit of a back half is pivot and give some ideas. It can feel overwhelming and complex. So what really matters? One of the huge benefits that we have right now in fresh foods versus at any other time in my 20-year career in this industry is the amount of actionable insights and data that are as ubiquitous in fresh now as they are in our center store counterparts. But we also really want to be a little bit strategic here. We know this isn't easy. It's not easy for us every day when we work with all of you. So we want to give some ideas of how you, whether you're a retailer or a supplier, could look at those metrics that matter, that drive ideas. And we're specifically going to do 2 exercises, one on berries and one on Thanksgiving holiday meats, because both show opportunity. So ultimately, metrics that matter. Right now in fresh foods, as Rick said, and as we've shown, the consumer, who is complex and has many different needs, is in the driver's seat. And what we also know is through data and through insights and through analysis, we can understand the 4 things that matter. One is we have to really understand our competitive landscape. So for all of those folks who ask the great questions around what does it mean at club versus here versus there, we'll cover that next. But I also really want Kelly to share with you some of the metrics that matter, because our suggestion at Circana is you likely have the data and the insights, hopefully, that you need in your organization. And if not, of course, we'll help you. But if you can answer some key questions about sales, shoppers, and how the consumer eats your food or shops your store, we think that's the golden ticket to your fresh formula. So retail competitive landscape. As many of you know, Circana has really been on a mission to capture everywhere that consumers shop today, because it is so much more vast than just the other supermarket across the street. So always we want to give an update on how channels have affected fresh food specifically. This is our famous stacked bar chart that we update monthly for our clients by each department and for total fresh foods and total food and bev. So I know I just caught Kelly that this still says 10/6/24. But do know that this is through 1/26/25. We literally update this data monthly. And when we do so, when we look at 2024, the traditional grocery supermarket, which is probably close to 50,000 stores in this nation today, has lost share just in the last 2 years and is at an all-time low for total all outlet share of fresh foods. Now, who's picked up is on both spectrums, as Rick said. You've got mass and club holding the share they gained during the pandemic and continuing to edge out a little bit more. What you also see, and we tried to illuminate here, is the specialty store at 9.6. Specialty stores are any store that specializes in just one or a few things. It's not an all things to all people supermarket. It could be a cafeteria. It could be a wine shop. Increasingly, we're seeing it be things like fruit markets, bodegas, specialty stores that have Asian or Hispanic, that is honestly being shopped by even people who aren't native of those industries. You're getting, the fresh foods industry is being tapped both by the value players, but also by the specialists as well. Further, when we decompose growth, not actual share, but who's adding to that dollars that hit an all-time high in fresh foods last year, is also fair share disproportionate. So when we just take year-over-year growth in total fresh foods across the retail spectrum, you see that even though food traditional channel supermarkets are 44% of all 2024 sales, they were only 4% of growth last year. And I know from avocados to ground beef, this was felt by our retail partners, that they were not equally enjoying some of those tailwinds that were coming. But where we saw disproportionate growth, again, as Rick said, mass held its own, contributed at its same share rate to growth as well as to its total. But who has a high index is everything from value as well as premium natural grocers. Then you've also got the internet coming on strong. Why shop every aisle when you can just solve your need with a quick search on Amazon Fresh or ordering a Butcher Box to your front door? And club again continues to punch across its weight. So I did a bit of an analysis for today based on a suggestion by Rick. I ranked at the banner, not channel, the actual retailer level on a couple different metrics. And we had some clear winners. 7 retail banners in the US saw short and long-term growth in fresh foods, and also don't just grow in fresh, they also deliver uniquely in a more developed share of fresh. Fresh is more important to their outlet, in short. Those 7 banners, none of them came from traditional food outlets. Food Value, Club, multiple club, and specialty stores. Again, now specialty stores are each independently small, but in aggregate, that channel is delivering short and long-term growth by meeting the unique needs of consumers by just being good at 1 or 2 things. Now, we also saw some channels that have just grown like gangbusters, but they were undeveloped and fresh. If these 22 banners decided to up the ante in fresh the way they're doing in total food and beverage or total store, imagine that they'd immediately be over on the right. Now, this 22 banners, we did see some grocery chains. But what's interesting is that they also were different from their other brethren in that in the last few years, they stood for something specific. Now, other channels would be Mass Super, particularly the biggest one you're all thinking of, fit here. Growing like gangbusters, easier to shop than ever, and they're underdeveloped in fresh share just because they're good at everything and they gain that mindset dollar. We also saw that the incoming attachment of fresh foods being sown in some dollar channel meant that while they don't contribute a lot, they're growing. And further, the pure play online sector also, if it got its fresh act together, would be a master stroke because they're growing like gangbusters. So where's everybody else? Every other banner and channel, including more than 50 traditional supermarkets, fall below growth, or basically growth was inconsistent. It was either short or long. But moreover, they have declining fresh share. So while there are a few other chains and channels that suffered this fate, our message from our retailer is you've got to understand the total market, not just stores that look like you, and you've got to focus on developing who you are in fresh, not just all things to all people. That's from a retailer perspective. Kelly, can you talk a little bit about some of the analytics we do from a category or supplier perspective?
Absolutely. So it's a complex world out there, as Jana and Rick both addressed, and it's also a highly interconnected world. There is so much data and information out there, it's really easy to lose the forest through the trees. What we find to be helpful and what we have developed with this is we kind of do a scorecard system. It really helps us to identify the insights that drive the business forward with a holistic and cohesive look across all the metrics at our disposal. Because when we think about it, right at the end of the day, our retail point of sale overall is connected with how our consumers shop and behave in the categories, as well as that behavior is then connected into their consumption. How much are they consuming? So these 3 aspects work together to help us really to uncover and identify areas that we could do better in, help us kind of discover untapped opportunities, as well as to help us prioritize. Because we've talked about this before. We can't do everything and be everything to all people. We need to do some things that really can focus and make an impact on your business. Now, we thought it'd be kind of interesting to take one example and bring it to life here before Jana gets into a deeper case study. But if we were to take a department perspective, so let's look at bakery. When we talk about bakery here, we're really referring to the perimeter bakery where we have all of the cakes and the rolls and everything that's made in store. And then along with the bread aisle that is out there, that includes sliced breads, some English muffins, packaged bread products. So if we look at the bakery here in the chart highlighted, bakery performance is relatively flat. Dollar sales are flat, volume sales flat, and the price hasn't really changed much. Compared to all the other departments that are in the store, there's definitely room for improvement, but how could we do that? So then what we'd like to think about that is, well, maybe I want to change consumer behavior. So if we go to the next department view, looking from the consumer panel behavior side of this, what we can see here is that bakery is actually one of the lower spend categories for our consumers, where they only spend $423 compared to other departments such as meat, which is more than double that. And even compared to deli, which is just one rank above, they're spending an extra $250 there. So how do we start to tap some of that? It's the same way if we look from a growth perspective. The the consumers generally are not spending as much in bakery over the last year, which is 1% is flat, some of the lowest growth compared to other departments. Now, where we could find some opportunity here is what if we were to expand the trips? How can we get consumers to come one more time to the bakery aisle? Well, in order to figure out how to boost and bring consumers one more time to the department, we have to understand how they consume. As Rick said, we have to help them solve for the meal itself. So this leads us to the consumption data. If we understand how consumers are thinking about meals, how they are preparing for it, that helps us to understand where are these opportunities for us. So take, for example, there is a significant growing trend in the morning of snacks on the go. And some of the top growing foods in terms of that snack on the go is sweets and desserts and sweet morning breads and pastries. Now, where's the challenge? There's not a ton of individual single serve items in there that would make it really convenient to take on the go for consumer. So we can continue to tap into this momentum by offering and developing more products that might address this immediate meal need. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Jonna to take us deeper into this fresh formula and our thinking.
In the spirit of top trends and fresh, there are many things that make this complex. And so like Kelly said, it's about thinking holistically about your consumer, your competition, but we really want to focus on 3 areas and show how when you consider it from this different lens, you might get different opportunities. So we consider that our fresh formula. Ultimately, a mega trend right now is what is the definition of value? Now, if you're a returning guest to this series, you know that FMI and Circana have done a lot of work on value is more than price. Why don't price promotions and deep discounts drive as much lift? Well, I always use this joke because I worked on bananas since the day I got hired by Perishables Group back in 2003. Even if we gave bananas away for a penny, would you buy 100 bananas? No, if you have no way to eat 100 bananas. Definition of value is not in the price equation always. A lot of times it's in things like convenience and relevancy. Further, we solve meals. How we eat is how we shop and how we consume. So the role of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as well as Kelly was showing, what are those moments that we're missing? Like hybrid meals and snacks. And Rick, I know you and I had a great conversation. We started to work with some of our suppliers around special occasions as well. So how we eat the food is as important as how much we sell. And third, but most important, what's the motivation of a consumer to buy your product? We know retailers and suppliers are asking every day about consumer decision trees, and those are vitally important. But what role does health and well-being play in your shopper, in your food, in your brand or your variety? Is it an everyday indulgence or a special occasion? What lifestyle influences could actually drive more people? Instead of just asking, is GLP-1 stealing my dollar volume? Why not ask, what role does someone who's on a GLP-1 play? And look at GLP-1 consumers and learn how to market to that need. So Rick, I put this slide up here. Would love your thoughts before we go through the examples for berries and Thanksgiving meats on the fresh formula.
You know, I think one of the things I think about that's winning is the versatility of some items. And so when I think of the versatility of items, I look at like chicken in the meat department. Yes, chicken was a lower price, but look how versatile it is. Then I look at ground beef or ground turkey or ground chicken or ground pork, very versatile. When I look at berries, very versatile. That brings value to a customer. If I can take that item and turn it into 4 different things or solve 4 different problems. With berries, it could be solving a breakfast, it could be solving a dessert, it could be an accompaniment, it could be snacking. It meets all those needs. So we need to think about those things, and it goes back to solving for the consumer. And those were the thoughts that you and I were talking about the other day.
I love it. And that's exactly it. And so let's do this exercise together as Rick, Kelly, and I did. And one last piece, of course, I forgot to click here. I think we also have to stop thinking about getting all consumers to do all things all the time. One of the illuminating points is every single product I work on, frankly, guys, even toilet paper, has expandable consumption. And definitely in fresh foods, we have 100% of people shopping each of our departments as Kelly shared. But every single category, brand, retailer has room. And the only way we're going to do that is by differentiation. So we're going to take a look at berries and Thanksgiving center plate proteins today. First on berries, why are we looking at berries? Aren't they just knocking it out of the chart of fresh formula? Yeah, for as long as I've done this, berries have been a consistent high seller. In fact, a berry brand, Driscoll's, made it to the #2 slot in Circana's total US food and beverage brand ranking last year. That's how many berries are sold in the US every single year. But one of the things that we've noticed about berries is because they consistently sell so much and gain reach, frequency, and occasions, are we just going to go up and up and up forever? And how did they get there? So we look at it from a sales scorecard standpoint. Berries is awesome at doing a lot of great dollar things. Now, last year, we did see a slight downtick in price per volume. Now, a lot of that in working with the industry has more to do with the day-to-day decisions and the crop supply, which is incredibly sensitive to weather events. And we all know there's been a lot of weather events. But one of the things I thought was really interesting about berries to bring into this lens is, yeah, crushing it in volume dollars. Price is down. Yay, volume and dollars are up. The classic economic equation. But promotional lifted only 25% when 42 weeks of the year, something in the berry category is on promotion. Our depth of discount and our promotional lift are not equated to each other. Are we really just subsidizing how many berries? Because isn't the role of promoting something to drive incrementality, not just to berries? I've also done deep dive studies that when we do promote berries, we're not necessarily bringing more dollars to the produce department. We're also no longer getting people to switch which store they were already planning to buy. A lot of it is subsidized. Let's take a consumer lens to the berry category. First off, talk about ubiquitous. 83% of US households bought fresh berries last year, and that rate holds steady. Buy rates are going up, even despite a slight price, because we're getting people to buy berries more often. Furthermore, they're spending $6 when they buy berries. They're buying 2 items. That's how they're getting to $6. They're buying multiple berry items. We also know, though, that quick trips are very limited for berries. Furthermore, the in-basket spend eroded. And take a look at the grocery share of wallet by generation. Berries are much more disproportionately bought today by Gen X and boomers. So one more new lens that I wanted to ask our consumption experts about. What are people doing with berries that's driving all this growth? We found that 1 year over year alone, berries added 5 additional eating occasions from 23 to 24, specifically with, and by the way, all of our consumption data is based on individuals in the household, whereas shoppers are, of course, the decision maker. When it comes to eating occasions, Gen Alpha, young children, are eating more berries more often. Furthermore, older Gen Zs who are already establishing their old households, they're gravitating toward berries. But then the Gen X and the boomers are buying just as they always have. Berries are in multiple occasions throughout the day, but it's not that we couldn't have grapes or other snackable produce make it into those occasions too. So to wrap it up, my recommendations to the fresh berry industry using this lens is continue to anchor on why you win. You are a convenient, easy, highly experienced, good taste experience food that is available everywhere. Those are your strength points from a value definition. Not so much about the individuals. Why aren't we promoting and talking to consumers about all of those powerful points? Because if we don't, what if the short shelf life causes them not to be worth it? What if people have an inconsistent taste experience and therefore then they're not necessarily going back to berries? Last but not least, why are we promoting so much if it's not yielding retailer loyalty or getting more dollars into those other channels? We also know that we need to potentially consider berries on the go, referencing how easy they are to prep. Value add berries is a considerable portion of this category. And next, from a health halo, Why berries over other healthy options, not just why berries over grapes? We only have a few minutes, but Kelly, I think the lens of Thanksgiving also lends to this because we found a very surprising thing happen in Thanksgiving 2024, didn't we?
Absolutely. Thanksgiving is evolving. So, we have Friendsgiving out there. We're also starting to see the handoff to the younger generation from boomers, and that's partially fueling this changeover from the traditional Thanksgiving meals and sides. So when we think about Thanksgiving, right, we think about the big whole bird turkey out there on the table. We think about the cranberry sauce and the stuffing, but that's not potentially what is winning with Thanksgiving. What we found in this deeper analysis, which we have additional work in the download pack, is that consumers' needs and preferences are shifting when they think about Thanksgiving. They want variety. They are open to having multiple meat types on the table. They're thinking about, and it's not just to feed a larger group, they're thinking through, what? It'd be nice to have a smaller turkey, so I have a little taste of that, but maybe some ham, maybe some steak, something with beef or pork. So they really are looking to mix and match and make an experience that is unique, as well as satisfy the needs of multiple people at the table. As well, we have these younger hosts coming into play. Gen Z, young millennials, they're really more driving that buying multiple meats and having more variety, versus our boomers are the more established traditional shoppers who are looking for the larger pounds, the single protein. So it's just going to be fascinating to see here over this next Thanksgiving in 2025, what's to come. So if we think about the fresh formula aspect of this, we're winning because we're highly available. It's reliant on deep discounting to help, again, drive people to stores during those holiday moments. Where there are really opportunities for us to deepen is lean into this multiple protein aspect, help to provide more sizes. So it's not just, hey, here's a 16-pound bird. You might have an 8, a 10, a 12, beyond that. And it's all about really leaning into how do you help these hosts, especially these younger hosts who are less experienced, wow and please their guests with it. From an eating evolution standpoint, again, this is the evolution of the special occasion. This won't be the first time we're talking about it this year, and we're going to keep leaning into this because eating habits are changing, especially as these younger generations come into their own. We're also having opportunities to tap into leftovers. People want variety, so it's not a lot of the same thing. There's a snacking appeal to it. And again, hitting those pleasing multiple people. From a mindset standpoint, again, holidays and entertaining are all about indulging, delighting, the nostalgia and the comfort of it. We can lean into that further by helping to address some of the time intensity and the complexity of preparation. And there really, again, are just opportunities to help these younger generations gain confidence as they get to own the celebration and own it in their own way.
Thing that we didn't talk about on any of these fresh formula sides, because we assume that you're already looking at it, is yes. Should we do more price promotion? At which retailers? What should our shelf look like? All of those questions seeded by these strategies open up new and differentiated opportunities. So Rick, I know we got a question in the chat that I want to cover, but I want to let you react to what we're talking about here, and then I'll ask you the question as a follow-up.
Okay. I guess where I would come from at this point is that we're seeing that just running a price, like if I go back to my old retailer days, the way we grab shares, we would get a little bit hotter, give up some margin, try and get some share back. But your data is showing that's not driving that customer performance. So I would say first you need to stand for something. What is you can't just be plain vanilla. You got to stand for something. And then I think that we are suited in the industry to solve the consumer's problem. A restaurant can't solve it all. But a supermarket, not only can you get all the products, both in the fresh department and on the inside, but we even sell the pans and fry pans and containers that you cook it in and store it with, right? So everything's inside that box. We've got to break down silos and start thinking about more like how the consumer's thinking and how do we solve their problem. That's the big point I would try and get across based on the data I'm seeing here.
And that was what's interesting, because the question I wanted us to cover when the chat was around, wouldn't price, given that mass and club and some of these value players are stealing share, wouldn't we go to the mattresses on price? And I think your perspective was spot on. Price is always in the equation, right? It should say discover your fresh formula, because you should already know what role price plays in your consumer. Yeah. But I do think, I hope that what we've done today and what we'll continue to monitor throughout the year is we flip the script and think differently. I just got a friend who sent me an Instagram today about a new heart-shaped berry that she saw on Instagram, and she knows I do this for a living. She goes, where can I buy this? That's the kind of way consumers are thinking today. Now, if I was to tell her it was $200, she wouldn't have bought it. But I was to tell her it's over at this local grocer and it's $3.99, that would change everything, right?
Right.
So thank you all so much for joining our first Top Trends in Fresh. I do want to let you guys know that our next one will be on 5/15. The deck and download will again be back in your inboxes within at least 3 business days. I say that only because it is a holiday weekend. And I really invite you all to reach out to Rick, myself, and Kelly. We can't wait to talk with you more throughout this year, hopefully at Fresh Forward. Thanks so much.
Please do. Thanks.